Today, we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of progress reports. So, do you get progress reports that really don't tell you anything? Like maybe there's a letter or a number that says making progress? Well, today we're going to be talking about what needs to be in a progress report, what IDEA says about progress reports, and how you can take some advocacy steps to change what you're getting when those progress reports land in your email box. So I am Charmaine Thaner. If you are new to our show, welcome. And I want you to know that as an advocate, I work every day with families to make sure that their kids are safe, happy, and learning every day at school. I'm also a parent of an adult son with Down syndrome. I'm a retired teacher and author and host of our weekly show here. So say hi, let us know where you're watching from. If you are here on the replay, please know that you can still type in comments and ask questions. And speaking of comments, if you would like a copy of today's training notes and our slides, just type the word reports in the chat box and we'll get you set up for that. So we do have some people with us live. Let me welcome you. Karen is here. Hey, Karen. I don't know if you guys are getting snow. I've heard of snow being around. Those snow flurries are starting to fall, right? But let's get into our training today about the good, the bad, and the ugly of progress reports. Let me know in the comments if you have already gotten your first progress report from this first quarter. A lot of you get progress reports, I think, 4 times a year. Some school districts only give them 3 times a year, some just 2 times a year. And we'll talk about the frequency of progress reports. But let us know. Oh, Karen, look, she's in Colorado, and she says, we got 7 inches at our house, 2 in Florence, but in true Colorado fashion, it's melting. So yeah, I mean, it's like, usually in Colorado, we always can plan for a snowstorm over Halloween for sure, right? I guess this one's a little early. But Karen, have you gotten your progress report yet? Because if you have it handy, it would be great for you to have it beside you as we're going through today's training. If not, no worries. And like I said, you can get a copy of the slides and the training notes. If you want, just type reports in the chat box and we'll get those out to you. But let's go back here and oops. Okay, there we go. So the good, the bad, and the ugly of progress reports. So I would love for you to have us be more interactive. So if you can type in the chat box, how helpful have progress reports been for you, the ones that you've typically been given? And specifically, what do your progress reports tell you? And Lissa is here with us from Idaho. Hey, Lissa. And Lissa, we need to catch up on how things are going for your son. So we'll do that over in our membership group. But usually I have parents tell me that the progress reports aren't very helpful at all and that they don't really give parents that much information. These are the things that the progress report should be giving this is the information that it should be telling you. It should tell you what's been learned on each of your child's IEP goals since the last progress report. So if you're watching this live or in the replay, we are in the fall of the year. So your last progress report might be from May or June. And what I think is helpful is if you get both of those out and compare. What did it say last spring for progress? What is it saying now? The progress report should also have accurate data, and they need to be able to share that data with you so you can see how they're monitoring the progress. You also want to know how the teacher's interpreting the data. So I'm a very data-driven person, but I also love it in combination with narratives from teachers, because just looking at the raw data, just looking at the graph, doesn't necessarily tell you the complete picture. So if the teacher can say, I think this is, a true, assessment of where they are right now, or I've noticed when we started using more visual strategies this quarter, he really started doing more. I at least want a flavor of what the teacher is seeing. Plus, I want that data. And the other thing the progress report should tell you is, are there circumstances that show that there needs to be a change in the instructional strategies for your child? And we will talk more about that later, but you don't want to settle for a minimum kind of progress or no progress. I mean, that should be your red flag that something needs to change at school in order for your child to make more progress. So, like I said, we'll kind of be talking about that in a little bit. And we have a question here. Do I ask them how they are interpreting the data? What different models of interpretation are there, so I can identify when the teacher states how they interpreted it? And that is an excellent question. And I do have some specific slides with graphs of data and explanations and what you have to look for. So we will be covering that today. And also, just type in the word reports and you'll get a copy of the slides and also the training notes. So that will help, because there's going to be a lot of kind of dense information, dense as meaning like a lot of information today. So I thought by giving you a copy of the slides, that will probably help, so you can go back to these and see more information. So first, let's start with what the federal law requires. And remember, I'm not an attorney. I can't give you legal advice, but this is the wording from the federal law IDEA. It talks about progress reports have to have a description of how the child's progress is going toward meeting the annual goals described in it will be measured. So one is the progress report needs to describe how they're going to be measuring things. And if it's teacher observation, that's not going to be good enough, right? You want them to be collecting some kind of data. The federal law also says when periodic reports on the progress the child is making toward meeting the annual goals, such as through the use of quarterly or other periodic reports, concurrent with the issuance of report cards, will be provided. So the reason why I put this language here, because I think it's important when we're referencing the law, the statute, that you really see what that language is versus somebody's interpretation of it. So that slide will be in your training notes when you get that. But let's look at this, because what I have found is that so many schools and districts and states have interpreted this to mean you only get a progress report when other kids get a report card. And that was an example that they gave in IDEA, but that doesn't mean that's the only time you can get progress reports. And I generally advise parents to ask for more frequent progress reports. But let's look at some additional guidance that the U.S. Department of Ed gave us. And they clarified that when they talked about periodic, reports, or when report cards go home, that what they really meant was the specific times that progress reports are provided to parents and the specific manner and format in which a child's progress toward meeting their annual goals is reported is best left to the state and local officials to determine. So, as in many cases with IDEA, there will be, some, requirements, but then there's also leeway for states to, further describe exactly their method of doing it. Progress reports is one of those areas where there's some general information in IDEA, but they say like the specific times when progress reports have to go home, the format, what information are going to be included, that is up to your state and local district. So as many things that we talk about, you have to also know what your state rules and regs are for special education. And so if you want to take notes, you can. Like I said, I'll get the slides, but if taking notes helps, that's good. So what I suggest as an advocacy step is that you do talk when you're at an IEP meeting and request more frequent progress reports. To me, to even go 9 weeks, which is if you're on the quarter system, 9 weeks is a long time to go before deciding if something is working or not. Generally, the best practice is that every 6 weeks, the teacher will have had enough data taken that they can make a decision. Is what we're doing working or not working? And then they can make adjustments. And we'll talk more about those adjustments. So what I think is a good idea is to, when you're at the IEP meeting, they talk a lot about the goal, and then they kind of don't really talk much about the progress report, but offer a way to make it easy for teachers to share information with you. If they don't want to do a formal progress report every month or every 6 weeks, the other thing that you can do is look in your child's IEP and see under the annual goal, there should be like performance criteria, how often you're going to get the progress report, what they're going to be using to evaluate. And if they're saying that they're taking weekly or every other week data on the goal, then a super easy thing for the teacher to do would be every week or every other week, when they take a new snapshot of how your child's doing, is to share that information with you. So it doesn't have to be a real lengthy process. You are more successful when you ask for something additional that you want the teachers to do if there's an easy system to do it. So my suggestion would be, look however often they're collecting the data, ask them to make a copy of that and send it home to you. Excuse me. So how many of you have already gotten your progress reports? Or they may be coming out soon. And let me know in the comments, do you find them to be very helpful information or not? So These are the steps that teachers need to take in order to write a good progress report. Now, as a parent, you're not going to be writing the progress report, although you could, from your observations, give information to the staff. But the basic steps that teachers need to be doing is they first need to be measuring, right? And we're going to talk about measurement in terms of the baseline data, the measurable goal, and how they measure progress. They need to record that progress, track that progress. Then they need to monitor it, which means that they take some time to reflect on the data that they just got and really decide if the instructional strategies they're working are really helping your child or not. And then the next step is if there needs to be an adjustment, that they need to do that. There needs to be a change in how often your child is getting instruction, what the group, looks like, where he's getting it, those kinds of things for, is it 15 minutes a day? Is it 30 minutes a day? So there's adjustments that they could be making. And then all of that will lead to a real helpful, meaningful progress report. So let me know if you have any questions about this. And like I said, you'll get the slides. Just type in reports in the comments there. Oops. So when we talk about measurement, it's not just measuring the progress, but we need to talk about making sure that the baseline data for the goal is measurable. And we also have to make sure that the IEP goals are measurable. Now, you may be saying, Charmaine, I thought this was going to be about progress reports. Why are you talking about baseline data and IEP goals? Well, the progress report reports on the progress from IEP goals. If you don't have an IEP goal that is really measurable, it's really difficult to get a good, sense of progress and be able to get a meaningful progress report. The measurable annual goal is based on where your child was when they took the baseline data. If you don't have good baseline data, as far as being reliable and valid, then it's going to be hard to write a goal that's measurable. Then it's going to be hard to get a good progress report. So yes, we're going to be talking about progress reports, but we're going to take a couple steps back, and we're going to first look at baseline data. With baseline data, again, this is a required part of the IEP, but it's pretty much always glossed over. So if you have your child's IEP, you can look and see with each goal, there should be baseline data. You need to make sure that it's accurate and that they objectively measured it, right? It's not just a gut feeling. I think he does this 50% of the time. It's, the baseline data has to be connected to the goal. So if you have a goal about decoding and reading, you want that baseline data to be about their current level of decoding, right? So there's got to be a connection between the baseline and the goal. And then you need to have the teachers remember that goals need to be measured under the same baseline conditions. So I know this is kind of like a lot of like special ed ease jargon. So if you have questions about this, just say stop, time out, explain what you're talking about. So I'm finding that to be really true, that progress reports have not been very helpful. And she also said that she just got hers and it was horribly documented. And so when that happens, and we'll talk about this again later, but if you get one of those progress reports that doesn't tell you anything, then I think what's helpful is to request an IEP meeting and sit down with the team, just with that on the agenda, to talk about how we can make sure our progress reports are really helping us. If the progress report isn't meaningful to you as a parent, it's probably not going to be that meaningful to the teacher either. And the teacher might be like, this is just one thing I have to check off, but they might not be spending as much time as I need to really reflect on, what this data shows them, if they have any data, right? So let's look at baseline data first. Oops. So we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, the ugly of baseline data. So here's a good example. It says, given a 1-minute first grade reading fluency progress monitoring tool, and they have in parentheses, it would be reading and a curriculum-based measurement. Brandy currently orally reads 17 correct words per minute with 77% accuracy. So this is a good example of baseline data because it's real specific. It even tells us what tool that they're going to be using, a curriculum-based measurement, and that we can go into if you've got questions about. And it tells us that she's orally reading. So she's going to be reading out loud. They're going to give her words and time her for a minute. And they figured out that right now she's reading 17 correct. And that out of the list of words, she had an accuracy of 77%. So that is helpful. And that kind of baseline data is going to be really important, because then when you look at progress reports, you're going to say, well, back in whenever this baseline was taken, this is where my child was. And now I look at the progress report and look how far they've come. Hopefully, right, that they made progress. Now, a bad example of baseline data is if it only says something like, Brandy currently reads 17 correct words per minute with less than 80% accuracy. So one, we don't know if she has to read out loud, if she's reading silently. Saying that it's less than 80%, I mean, like, that doesn't tell you very much information, right? But it gets worse. This is an ugly baseline data example. Brandy currently reads 17 correct words. She has a hard time answering comprehension questions. So remember, I had talked about how the baseline data has to relate to the goal. And not often, I guess, but it happens quite a bit, is I'll see all this other information in the baseline data, and it's like that has nothing to do with the goal of, reading more words correct per minute. So that's another kind of red flag that you can look for if the baseline data talks about other skills that aren't related to the goal. And then, of course, just by telling us that she reads 17 correct words, I mean, we don't know, was there a certain grade level for the words? How many, words were there? Was this a time test? Anything like that. So if you start with poorly written baseline data, chances are you're going to have a poorly written IEP goal. If you have a poorly written IEP goal, chances are you're not going to have a very good, meaningful progress report. Okie dokie. So let's see. On my son's report card, they documented their RTI and not the IEP goals he met or didn't meet. And so some teachers get confused, I think, sometimes. It's like, this is report card time. So yes, your child should be getting a report card and should receive grades from the general ed teacher, or however they mark report cards. But they also should be getting separate progress reports from each service provider. So if your child gets services from a special ed teacher, she should be writing progress notes on, maybe the academic goals for your child, whatever she's supporting your child. If your child gets speech and language services, they need to get a separate progress report from the speech language pathologist about progress for their goals, the OT, the PT. If there's a behavior interventionist that is working on specific goals, whoever those service providers are, each one of them is responsible for giving you a report on how much progress your child has made on that goal that they're working on. So what you could do is to send an email to school and say, I received the report card, thank you. However, I did not receive the IEP progress reports. Please let me know when I can expect those. And if you don't hear anything back in a few days, you send another email. You want to document that you're asking for that and showing that you still haven't received it. But usually after one email and kind of reminding them, they will quickly write a progress report and send it to you, hopefully, right? So that baseline data is like really important. And here's one of Michael Giangreco's cartoons about data. And it says, what are you doing with our student data? And the person's taking all these papers out of the oven. And then let me make sure I can see the rest of the cartoon here. When I started, it was raw data. It's still not done. And so many times I think parents hear from advocates or from other folks to ask, show me the data. However, if you don't really know how to interpret that data, it can be junk, right? I mean, just because they can show you a graph with colored dotted lines and dashed lines doesn't mean that that's really helpful data. So today, when we talk about charting and tracking data, I'm going to show you some examples and give you some explanations about interpreting data. So stay tuned for that. And the other thing I forgot to tell you is we have our Louise Hay positive affirmations. And towards the end of our show today, we'll be picking 3 lucky winners to get their own Love Yourself affirmation card. So if we look back here at our topic of data, if you have your child's progress report with you, if you can see, do you think your child's baseline data is accurate and measurable? Or do you think it would be categorized as the good, the bad, or the ugly? At an IEP meeting, one of the things that you can ask about is how the data was taken for the baseline. And like I said, often the whole subject or the whole, discussion about baseline data hardly happens. It's, when you're talking about the present levels of performance, but you want to ask how that information was gathered because you want to make sure that it's objective, that it's accurate. If you see something totally different when you're working with your child, you need to bring that up. So it's important that they look at, a true accurate measurement of where your child is right now. And so let's see. Is it okay to bring 7th grade state level requirements to use to compare to baseline data? So I'm assuming that your child's in 7th grade. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, right? They're supposed to be, working on goals that correlate to your state standards. So one of the things that you can do is to, if it's like for one subject like math or something, you could print off your state standards for math, bring those to the meeting. It helps kind of see the sequence of what kids are supposed to be learning. And that can be a way of when we take the baseline data, let's make sure we capture where he is in this sequence of math skills. So that could definitely be something that you talk about at the IEP meeting. So thanks for your questions and comments. Keep them coming, because here we go. We've got some more Clint Eastwood coming up. This is an example of a good measurable goal. Now, this is a template that I think is helpful. It's not like you have to use this, but I think what's nice is it breaks down to me what would be best practice as far as components for a measurable goal. So you want to know who will do what, with what materials, given how much time, with how much support, with what degree of accuracy, in what environments, for how many times. So a good measurable goal would be Jason will read aloud a story from the 2nd grade basal reader, given 20 minutes with no more than 3 verbal prompts, with 90% accuracy in his 2nd grade classroom for 5 consecutive days. Now, if you have your child's IEP, you can look at one of the goals. Do your goals contain all of this information? If they do, then that's going to be a good measurable goal that you can use. But let's look at what a bad measurable goal would look like. So here they have Jason's going to read a lot of story, but we don't know with what materials, how much time he's given. We do know that they don't want more than 3 verbal prompts. We know the degree of accuracy, and we know for how many times. So we don't want a student just doing something one time and saying, oh, great, they met their goal. We want to see that measured over time. So you can see the components that are missing here. And so this would not be a good, this would be a bad measurable goal. And let's see what an ugly measurable goal would look like. So here we have Jason will read aloud a story with 90% accuracy. So definitely this is missing a lot of the components, which makes it an ugly measurable goal. Oops. Let me make sure I get back here. And I think what happens is a lot of times if parents see numbers or percentages in a goal, they think that must be measurable, right? Because they wrote 90% accuracy. But if we don't know the other parts of how they're measuring that, then when we come to the time when progress reports are going to be written, it's really difficult for the teacher, for the para, for the parent to know what are we really measuring here. And if we measure it differently every time we send out a progress report because the goal was so poorly written, then we really have no way of keeping track of what they're doing. And so another good question, how do I get accurate measurement when my child is hard of hearing and is dyslexic and can't read or hear well? And that's an excellent question, because the school staff needs to be using assessments that are going to give them meaningful information. So one of the things that you can look at is in your IEP team is if there is no one that can get accurate information, then you can ask for an independent education evaluation. And find people that do have the training so they can get an accurate picture of where your child is, performing right now. Can I show how to create appropriate goals and accommodations for slow processing speed with average IQ? And yeah, so what I could do is I can come back at the end of the show, and I've got an appointment afterwards, so it might actually be tonight, and I could give you some examples. I don't know your child, so I mean, these would just be examples that then you can give us feedback if that would be helpful or not. So we've talked about making sure we have measurable baseline data to get measurable goals, because then we can get good progress reports. So let's continue on. If you look at your child's IEP, would you say that you have good, bad, or ugly annual goals? And an advocacy step to take is to request an IEP meeting and rewrite the goals so they are measurable. And you can do something like you could, actually bring that goal template that I just showed you. And remember that you'll be getting a copy of the slides. Just type in the word reports in the chat box there, and I'll send you the training notes and the slides from today's show. But what you want to do is, like I said, maybe you want to take that graph, let's see, or this template, and say this could be a starting point. Could we use this? You just have to be diplomatic about how you ask about that, because some teachers will be offended, like, oh, you think I don't know how to write a goal? And so you might talk to the teacher ahead of time about that so they don't feel defensive. But, use resources. You want to, make sure that we do develop those really specific measurable goals in order to have a good way for us to measure progress. So a little bit of a warning here. You can have bad and ugly baseline data and goals, and that will equal pretty much all the time a bad and ugly progress report. But guess what? You can have good, accurate, and measurable baseline data and goals, and it could still equal a bad and ugly progress report. So you still have to, maintain that conversation and keep that dialogue going with teachers about, how much your child has really learned and how they can show that in their progress reports. So we talked about measuring, right? Measuring the data and measuring the IEP goals. The second step is to make sure that teachers are recording the data, that they take weekly or every other week data, and that they plot it out so they can start seeing, is your child making progress on those goals? And you want to look and see, are they using only teacher observation, which means just subjective things? Are they using work samples from your child? Are they using, reliable data? You want to know what they're using to measure your child's progress, because you never know if it's going to be the good, the bad, or the ugly. So let's go into ugly data tracking. So these graphs came from the National Center on Response to Intervention. So if you would like more information, that would be a great website that you can go to. But here we have a graph, and it's got a purple dashed line, which is the goal line of how we, for this one, it's words read per minute. And you see where the child is now, and the dotted purple line shows you where they want the child to be 1 year from now. The green boxes are the data that they've been taking of how many words correct this student is reading per minute. So this might be, they might show you a graph like this, and it's like, okay, they plotted it out. This must be good. No, this is not a good example of data tracking. So let's keep going and see how we can get this to be better. One of the things that you want to look for, and this is why I want to give you the slides so you can come back and look at this, is when you look at that goal line, that purple dashed line that we saw, you want to have at least 3 weeks of instruction and at least 6 data points when you're seeing, the steepness of the goal line. So 3 weeks of instruction. So if it's at the beginning of the year, they're not going to get, a good, feel for things. They need to have at least been teaching your child for 3 weeks, and they need to have at least 6 data points. And then the teachers look at if your child's 4 most recent and consecutive CBM, which is curriculum-based measurement scores, are above the goal line, you increase the goal. So let's go back here. So if you look, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 data points. So that's good. And it looks like if you look down here for the weeks, this has been going on for about 8.5 weeks of instruction. And if you look at what the slide said, if their 4 most recent and consecutive scores are above the goal line, we have to increase. Well, let's see. We don't have any of these scores above the goal line, right? So this tells us right now that we don't need to increase that goal, but it's still lacking some information that we need. We also want to look at if the 4 most recent and consecutive scores are below the goal line. That tells us to make an instructional change. So let's go back here. Does this student have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Yes, this student has 5 data points that are below the goal. So that should tell us that we need to make some kind of a change in the instruction. So let me look here in the comments and see if this is being helpful for you guys. So how is data included in how is behavior included in progress report? How is that data collected? Like shutting down, not being involved in any classwork, but not acting out. So you would have to see if your child has, what your child has for behavior goals and what they said in the goal that they were going to be measuring, right? So if they're measuring how much time on task your child is, attending for in class, then somebody, a lot of times it's the para is taking data in the classroom, or maybe the special ed teacher is taking data in the classroom to show how much time on task your child is. And they would look at that at least once a week, maybe a couple times a week, maybe every other week. You also have to look at that schedule of how often they say they're going to collect the data. That's also written in your IEP. But yeah, there are ways, as long as there's a measurable goal for behavior, then they should be able to use that data and tell you in a progress report how much progress your child is making. And Alyssa says, Charmaine, how does the making of goals pertain to time spent with the student in achieving that goal? Is it appropriate to have a goal of progression of 2 grade levels in reading, for instance, as a goal, but then only giving 15 minutes a week in time spent working on that goal? Yes, that would definitely be an ugly example, Alyssa. It's like, yeah, there should definitely be a correlation between what they're working on in the goal, and then you look further down in the IEP paperwork and you see that service grid of how much time they're getting. Even if they only expected your child to make a few months of growth in reading, I don't know how that would be accomplished in 15 minutes a week of reading instruction. That would be like a huge red flag. So, if that's happening, then I say that I would suggest that you call for an IEP meeting, because you need to have them, walk through their train of how they think. Just 15 minutes a week is going to help your child make that much progress in a year. And Lisa says, it seems like an okay written goal, but the time spent in working with him isn't accurate. Right. So, and that's a great point. And that's why I'm saying, even if you have great baseline data and great goals, you can still have like a lack of information in order to measure progress. So that would be one of the things that hopefully the teachers are tracking the data for your son and whatever reading skill they're measuring. And my guess is he's going to have a lot of data points that are under the goal line. And therefore, that is an indication that something needs to change. The instructional strategy, the time they're spending working with them would be like the obvious one, right? But that's why you want teachers tracking this data and really plotting it out so we can see visually if he's making progress or not. And she said that was last year's goal. So yeah. And Liz is in our Trailblazer membership group. And so we can also go into that even more in depth. Liz, if you want to type in our membership group what his current reading goal is, and we can kind of talk through that. If anyone else watching our live or replay is interested in our monthly Parent Trailblazer membership group, where you get a lot of individualized attention as far as helping you figure out what the next steps are for your child and advocating for them, let me know in the comments and I can give you some of that information. So let me take this one down. So we were talking about that analysis and that we want to make sure that teachers throughout the year continue to collect that data, right? So let's look at a bad example of data. Now on this example, and let me see if I can pull this up here. We have the purple dotted line, and that's the goal line. We have the green squares, which are the scores that they got. And now they've added a trend line. And the trend line is helpful. And it will give you, a better glimpse of where things are going. So we can see over time how big that gap is going to be. It's like if this student keeps progressing at this level, he's not going to meet the goal at all, right? There's still going to be this huge gap. So this trend line is helpful, and we'll look a little bit here about what information you need to get an accurate trend line. You need 4 weeks of instruction and at least 8 data points. If the trend line is flatter than the goal line, then the kid is making insufficient progress and you need to revise the instructional program, or in some cases it's like add more time of instruction. If the trend line and the goal line are the same, no changes are needed, and again, to continue to take data. So when we look at this one, you can see here how they've plotted what's potentially going to be happening if the child continues on that rate. But this still isn't quite enough information for us to go on. So let's look at a good example. And again, these graphs and these examples come from the National Center on Response to Intervention. So that might be a website that you want to check out. Okay, so we've got the purple dashed line here for the goal. We've got the green boxes again for the data points that have been taken. And the initial trend line was this aqua one. And this is the original one where he was going to keep having a big gap. But then what they did, they said, you know what? I think we need an instructional change. We need to increase the number of, teaching sessions from 3 to 5 per week. So they put in a dotted line. This is at 8.5 weeks. They decided to increase the amount of sessions that the student was going to be receiving instruction. And now look, then they kept plotting those data points. And guess what? His trend line is like, he's going to surpass his goal. And so this is meaningful information. If a teacher is taking, data and it's just like all raw data and they're not putting anything on a graph, that makes it really hard to see the patterns. A lot of teachers use some kind of a computer program where they can plug in the numbers and it will make the graph. So it's not like they have to pencil paper do this on graph paper, but you can, right? And so these are the kinds of conversations that you want to be having when you get a progress report, and you want to help the teacher to understand too where your child is going. And without taking objective data, without really plotting it on a graph, it's really hard for you to be able to say your child is making progress, your child is learning more. If the rate of learning is so slow, that is that red flag. That means we've got to change something, right? And sometimes it's a conversation with the special ed teacher. Sometimes when you need even more accountability from the school, it's a conversation at an IEP meeting. But you need to do something to change, right? Because to create change, because if we continue to accept it, that's the kind of progress reports and the lack of data collection that we're going to get. So we as parents have to initiate something to make that change. And again, I know this is like a lot of information. So one of the things that I offer is in our membership group, we go into things like this much deeper and we can individually, respond more. And also, if you just type in the word reports, you'll get the slides and get some training notes too that will help. So, okay, so we got another question. It says, who requests the instructional change for the goal? Should they go above the goal line, the school or the parent? Or is it common for them to keep the goal the same even if they meet it earlier than the year time frame of meeting it? And this is a great question, and this is what comes up a lot too, because sometimes, as an advocate, when I start working with a family, I need a copy of their IEP, their evaluation, and their progress reports to get some context of how things have been going at school. And what I see sometimes is like in December, they'll say goal met, but the team never got back together to write a new goal. Or, there's no progress being met and the team never got back together to say, what are we going to change? So it ideally it's going to be the school that notices if things need to change and they're going to bring that to your attention. However, the ugly part is that might not happen. And so that means you as a parent are going to have to say, I've got this question, put it in writing, do it as an email, but say, we need to come together because I've got concerns about his goal is already being met. What are we going to do to increase that? Or the goal isn't being met. So yeah, if you don't hear from staff, then as a parent, you can initiate that. So hey to Anita and Holly. And Karen said she missed the whole thing because she ended up on the phone. And don't worry, the replay stays up here in my Facebook group. And I also put it on my YouTube channel, so you can always come back and see these. So no worries, you can catch up. So this is the kind of data that we want to be seeing. And if you're not seeing this, then you need to have a conversation, right? So do you think the data being recorded for your child is helpful? Is it the good, the bad, or the ugly? One of the steps that you could take is to meet with a special ed teacher, ask your questions so you understand how your child really is doing. I think one of the tragedies is, I sometimes will get phone calls from parents in March or April saying, I can't believe it. My child's hardly made any progress the whole year. And waiting until March or April to understand that your child isn't making progress is like wasting, right? 3/4 of the school year. So that's why I want you now with this first progress report to really examine it and see if it's really helpful. If it's not, have that conversation and get that changed. So Holly says that she just popped on. What about talking about the tools the school is using to meet their goals? Exactly. And Holly, earlier we showed an example of a good measurable goal. And one of the things that they had in that example was that they were going to be using a reading curriculum-based measurement tool to take those snapshots to get those data points. Some schools have, certain computer programs that they use, like Ames Web is a popular tool that a lot of teachers will use to track progress. When I send you the training notes, I'll also send you a resource of, if you really want to get into details of which tools are reliable and valid. And it's surprising to see Ames Web is used by so many people, but according to the rating from the U.S. Department of Ed, the Ames Web really has very low reliability and validity to it. So, but it does show other tools. So, Holly, did you put in? Yes, reports. So yeah, we'll get you that information when I send out the training notes and also the copy of the slides. So yeah, so there's so many components, right? And we're almost at the top of the hour, so we're going to go through a little bit more. But what I decided when I was actually writing all this training was like, this is a ton of stuff. So we're going to do a little bit more, and then we're going to stop so you have time to kind of digest all of this. And then we're going to pick up again next Thursday to talk about making adjustments and what a good progress report really looks like. So let's do monitoring is the next step. And we've talked a little bit about that as far as wanting teachers to be able to reflect each week when they're plotting that data, like, what is this showing me? We don't want them just seeing this as something to jump through the hoops for. We want them to see taking data is really going to help them as a teacher, and it's going to help your child to learn more. So, as I said, this is going to be continued. Next week, we will talk about how to make adjustments and what kind of adjustments can be made when your child is either reaching the goal or making very slow progress. And we'll also be talking about what good progress reports look like. And like I said, I want to make sure. Oh, Corey. Yeah, but the training is up, and you can watch the replay, Corey. It will be up here on my Facebook page. And Corey is another trailblazer in our membership group. So let me know if you're interested in becoming a trailblazer like Lissa and Corey are, and I can get you that information. But I also want to do our drawing because we have 3 affirmations, and some of these, might be something that you take with you when you go to your next IEP meeting. So I'm going to close my eyes and go through the comments, and I'm going to see who our first winner is for a positive affirmation, and it's Lissa. So Lissa, tell me if you want 3, 2, or 1. And I gotta get my pen so I can write this down. So which one do you want, Lissa? Let me know in the comments. Oh, Anita. She says, what does it mean to be a trailblazer? So it's a monthly membership group we have where we can give you really specific advice and you can ask real specific questions. And so the whole kind of purpose of our monthly membership group is to bring together a group of parents that are interested in being trailblazers and making changes for their school system, not only making changes for your child, but for other kids that are coming behind them. We do, monthly trainings, monthly Q&As, a lot of different individualized help, more than I can do in our Facebook group here. So if you want, Anita, I can send you more information. So let me know. And Corey says, yes, I'll definitely rewatch. Okay, Lissa, I don't know if you're still on. If you can let us know if you want 3, 2, or 1. I'm going to pick another person. And where did I stop? Anita. So, Anita, I don't know which one Lissa wants. So, Anita, you get a pick. Let me make sure. Okay. So, Anita, do you want 1, 2, or 3? Put a number in the box, and I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to mail it to you. Okay. So, Anita, which one do you want? And we've got 1 more to give away. So, let me stop on another comment. And it's got to not be my comment. And Holly, let's see if Lissa or Anita has said something. Anita wants 3. Cool. So let me write your name on here, Anita, and I'll read it to you. It says, so Holly, you can pick 1 or 2. It says, I trust and know that all is well in my world. And then on the back, it says, divine right action is guiding me every moment of the day. I know that whatever the outcome is, it is perfect for me and everyone concerned. So that's cool. So Anita, if you can just send me a private message with your mailing address and I'll mail you your affirmation. And Holly picked one. So let me write your name here. And Holly, yours says, I know inwardly what is right for me. And on the back, it says, I look in the mirror and say to myself, I deserve all good. I deserve to be prosperous. I deserve joy. I deserve love. So, isn't that nice? Holly, send me a private message with your mailing address. I can mail it to you. And Lissa, you have number 2. And it says, I let go of limitations and recognize the true beauty of my being. And on the back, it says, I visualize all my limitations falling away one by one until I am safe, healed, and whole. So, Lissa, this will be mailed out to you. So, Holly says, thank you. Thank you guys for being here. Next week, we will continue on with the good, bad, and ugly of progress reports. And we're going to be talking about what kinds of adjustments can be made. 1, does your child need a higher goal written? 2, are they making, kind of little to no progress? What kinds of adjustments can be made for those situations? And I'll also be sharing with you examples of good, bad, and ugly progress reports. And there's Lissa. She says, thanks, Charmaine. So until next week, I hope you guys enjoy your upcoming weekend. Have some time for yourself. I am Charmaine Thaner. My goal is to help you become an even better advocate for your child so they can make sure that they are happy and safe and learning every day at school. So I shall see you next Thursday at noon